Hello, my name is Aaron Carr. I am an anti-racist equity consultant, and I will be your facilitator today as we engage in a foundational workshop around creating healthy relationships with youth, also entitled Do No Harm. So really excited to walk through this with you all. Thank you firstly for taking the time to firstly engage in reflection sheet number one, which is really helpful, right? As we before we even get into this concept around oppression and around creating relationships with youth, it's really important for us to think about like who we are, like what identities we hold, and like what we're actually bringing into these relationships. So again, thank you all so much for that reflection. And I hope that that was really helpful for you as you start to think about kind of like your whole self and how you're making space for the whole self of other folks that you're in community with. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into the session. I will share my screen. And so for the rest of this session, you will not see me, but you'll hear my voice. So I'll be this elusive little ghost. I'm excited. Okay, so again, my name is Aaron Carr. I use they, them pronouns. And I am actually originally from Detroit, Michigan. When I was growing up, some identities that were really important to me um, were, of course, or identities that I was really conscious of and aware of. Going back to kind of the reflection you all were doing on reflection sheet one, is I was very aware of the fact that I was Black. I grew up on the east side of Detroit during the crash of the auto industry. Um, and when I started school initially, my parents, my dad worked in a factory, and that was when the artist industry was booming, and so he had a lot of money, and they actually paid for me to go to private school in elementary. So I spent my first 4 years in private school in an all-white setting. Even though I grew up and I lived on the east side of Detroit, which was actually predominantly Black, so I got to see this like juxtaposition between what it felt like to and what it what the experiences was of someone who grew up in a predominantly Black community, but also what it felt like to be in an all-white community, and like how my identity was honored or made space for, and how it wasn't. Um, so that really was formative for me. It, like, as a child, I remember, especially once I left private school, not feeling, and moving into public school for the rest of my education, not necessarily feeling very connected to my community, or connected to any community really, because I didn't necessarily know how to process that. Um, so yeah, just like something I was talking, like just wanted to connect back to what we were talking about in that reflection sheet. That was a little, those are a little, that's a big part of my socialized identity, is that I'm Black. Another big part of my socialized identity that has really impacted the way I experienced adults or relationships as a child or as a youth person, um, was that I was queer. And so for a lot of my childhood, I actually just chose not to talk, because there were definitely no spaces in community, in school, in other, groups that I was in to really talk about queerness. It was something that was kind of like swept under the rug in my community. And it really did shape the way that I was able to build relationships with people, because I felt like I wasn't able to talk, or just express myself. So that was a little bit about me, where I grew up. So fast forward, I left Detroit when I was 17, and I traveled all over the country to just figure out what communities I wanted to be a part of, and ended up actually landing in Seattle. And I worked, I initially, when I came to Seattle, worked as a program manager for an education nonprofit working in Seattle public schools, specifically in an elementary school in West Seattle, where I worked for about 2 to 3 years. And that was a really beautiful experience for me. I realized that I was very young, right? I was like 22, 23 when I got that role. And it was really interesting because I got to sit on the leadership kind of team for that school. So I worked with the principals and interventionists and teachers and families and, the PTA, all types of groups really to think about, and especially students, right? To think about what it looks like to really support students in navigating the system. One thing that was really unique for me is that, again, I was a young Black queer educator amongst a lot of non-Black, oftentimes white, oftentimes middle-aged to a little bit older educators who definitely didn't have the same perspective on education as I did. And so I realized that I had to show up as an advocate. And a big part of this training is an opportunity for me to kind of share with you all what I've learned, as I really had to figure out what it means to be an advocate and to use my power in whatever positionality, whatever leverage I have as an adult to kind of make the best possible reality for the students. So that's a little bit about kind of my background. I have a lot of experience in coaching and mentoring folks who are specifically called interventionists, or folks who work with like academic small groups of students with math and English language arts. So I was really there to coach them on how to create healthy, like nurturing and nourishing environments for youth. So I'm really going to be able to support you all with that in this session and through these reflection sheets. One thing is that I specialize in youth-centered programming. Again, I'm very much a creative. I think a lot about how to build space with people, right? Like the space, right, is what we're really doing when we're engaging in any relationship. We're moving into a space with someone, right? And so I really think about like, what does it mean for me to move into the space with someone? Like, what do I need to account for in this space? How do I share this space? Right. And again, a lot of this session is going to be like, how do we share space with youth when actually we live in a community where youth don't necessarily need to be shared? Like space doesn't need to be shared with the youth, actually. In a way, we can kind of like impose our thoughts on it. And we'll talk more about that today. But just want to name that that's something that I think a lot about, is like, how do I really create programming that centers youth and their needs and works alongside them and like builds off of their dreams. And lastly, I'm an artist and a community worker. So even outside of the work that I do in schools and in consultation work, I really do focus on healing spaces for community, of like, how do we heal from the impacts of oppressive systems? A lot of my life has been trying to figure out how to heal from living and existing in oppressive systems. And we'll talk about what oppression is soon. And so really my art and my community work is all about engaging with people on how to like be better for each other as we kind of like move through some of these harmful experiences together. So I guess a quote that really resonates with me and that really helps frame the session that we're going to engage in and why this session is important. It's a quote by Lila Watson. And what it says is, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. I learned this from an early age, right? Like growing up in Detroit, right? That there's this beautiful collective impact that we have when we work together. When a bunch of people come together and decide that they want to do something, something gets done, right? And so like one thing that I always want to name a really important value is that like we, a small group of folks, can do a lot of work, right? If you and me, just us two, decided to kind of like change the way we showed up for youth and for like the youth we get to work with, like that changes and impacts the life of at least, 2, 3, 4 folks who can then impact other folks, which becomes a ripple, right? And so I really believe in collective impact. 2, I really believe in this focus on healing, right? And so one thing that's really important is that we are all healing, right? We have all been impacted by oppressive systems, no matter what your race, your identity, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation. It doesn't really matter, because we all have been impacted by this idea that says that some people are better than other people, right? And so when we're engaging in this work with youth, when we're thinking about being anti-racist, it's really important for us to start to think about like how we can become liberated, how we become more free by supporting the youth that we're working with, and not necessarily like thinking of ourselves as saviors or people who are coming in to save the day or make it better for someone else when it's already great for us. We have to account for and realize that we all need to be healing, and we can be healing together, right? And that's when it looks like, well, that's what it sounds like when our liberation is bound up together. And that's when we really should work, right? And so as you come into this session, I want you to like pause and think about it. Like, are you thinking about how this is going to be beneficial for you as well? Have you started to think about like how liberation, or how your youth having a better kind of environment to learn in and grow in and to feel like, nurtured in, can support you in your journey right now? Right. And if you haven't, it's something to pause and think about, because like the work that we're doing together is about all of us. It's not just about people who are disadvantaged or the people who seem to be privileged. It's about everyone healing and transforming together, which is my last value. Is I really believe this work is transformational, because it requires the adults to do internal self-reflection that changes the way that they look at the world. And in changing the way they look at the world, changes the way that they show up and impact and support folks in this world, right? And so really we are all focusing on transformation together. Cool. So that's just a little bit about me, a very, very, down and dirty intro into kind of like why I think this session is going to be really beautiful, right? Is because like we really don't want to do any harm, right? When we engage in relationships, like there's a lot to learn when it comes to being an anti-racist practitioner, and that's quite the mouthful, and it's going to be quite a journey for you. But firstly, let's just stop and do some like internal reflection on kind of like even what that journey means. What does it mean to engage in it? And so that's what this session is going to be about. which helps me move right into our learning objectives. So in this session, participants are going to, firstly, explore the following concepts: justice, anti-racism, oppression, and power, right? So in this work, one thing that I found as a consultant, leading this for so many different types of groups, is that language and like the definition of words serves as a real barrier to success, a barrier to us even engaging in the work. Sometimes people are so afraid to even start because they don't even know how to say it. They don't even know like how you would define it or describe the thing that we're going towards. And so we're going to spend some time in the beginning of this session just thinking like, what are we actually going towards? What are these words mean? What is oppression? What is anti-racism, right? People throw it around a lot and I haven't necessarily had the time to digest. So we're going to give you that. Two, we're going to gain more context around what it means to have a culturally responsive relationship with youth to promote positive relationships and learning, right? Again, this is something that a lot of adults are really focusing on, especially in the Seattle Public Schools. It's one of the values that they're foundationally really like building out for all of the adults that work with youth, right? Is that we're thinking about the fact that if we have a healthy relationship with youth, like we now are able to listen to them and their needs and their concerns and help them navigate this system and navigate their own journeys of growth in whatever way is beneficial for them. And that is what a culturally responsive relationship is. And so we're really going to talk about kind of like what it means to have those relationships and how to promote positive relationships and account for things like racism and oppression and power dynamics. Lastly, we're going to engage in reflection to make connection between the learning and their work with youth, right? And so like a big part of this session is for you to really like reflect with yourself. So if you're the type of person who's like, I like to run through sessions, like I just want to get the content so I can be a better person, like definitely like slow yourself down in this, right? There's going to be moments where you can actually pause. And I really recommend you like taking your time, even if that means like stopping for a day and then coming back tomorrow. Like you can really take this at your own pace, but this is about reflection. So really ensure and support yourself in like engaging in deep, meaningful reflections. Cool. So that's kind of what this session is going to be about. What it looks like, we just did this overview of learning. So check, we're moving straight through the list. Two, we're going to explore what anti-racist work is, right? And so again, we're going to like really unpack some of these definitions that seem a little bit ambiguous or hard to understand. Three, we're going to actually unpack what oppression is, right? Which is this big insidious force that is really the root issue that we need to address. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then finally, we're going to talk about what it means to build culturally responsive relationships with youth. So it's going to be an action-packed pre-recorded session. And again, what's beautiful is that you can pause it. Even if I said something already where you're like, whoa, that was a lot, pause it, pause it as much as you need. Or which gets me to how to access this content, right? Firstly, be sure to have a way to take notes readily available. One thing about this type of content and these types of trainings is that there are a lot of things that I'm going to say. And I do not expect any of you all to like remember it and to like digest it all 100% and be like, at the end of this 60 minutes, I know everything I need to know. This is going to take some time. And so what I really want you to do is like, listen to the words that I say, listen to look at the slides, write down the things that resonate with you, reflect on those things. And then, like go take it slow. Like, I really believe that this work is intuitive work. What comes up for you is what you need to be like thinking about in your own personal journey right now. So please take notes so that you can think about what's coming up for you. Two, follow your own curiosity and intention. Like I said, like something's going to come up. Like when I first got this session, I thought a lot about, again, how to build space for youth, right? Because as a youth who didn't feel like there was space for my queerness, it was really important for me as an adult to actually create spaces for marginalized dynamics and identities for our youth, right? So follow your own curiosity and intuition. Three, pause the video. Like I said, as I've said it a lot of times, and I'm going to keep saying it because it's not always something that we're used to doing in these types of learning contexts, but definitely pause it when instructed and give yourself ample time to reflect and process information. So whether that is like, I'll tell you to like pause for 5 minutes and reflect and write down some ideas and keep going. But if you're like, hey, I actually needed 15 for that or 20, or actually that was a lot, I'm good for today, I'm gonna come back tomorrow, that also works. So please get what you need as you digest this content, because it's gonna be a lot, but it'll be, what it needs to be for you. It's cool. So we talked a little bit about what the session is going to be about. You all know a little bit about who I am. And again, you'll get to know a little bit more about me and my kind of experiences working with youth, and also just my experiences as a young person in the system as we move through this session. But firstly, we're going to talk about ways to think about anti-racist work. Because again, like this work is very sometimes hard to access. Like one thing, even for me as a consultant, I'll name that the one reason why people are consultants is not because they are like truly experts, like because you can't really be an expert in this work. We are people who've thought about it for a while, right? We've processed it, we've reflected it, we've used it and like engaged in it in our practices, and now we have some like nuggets of truth and wisdom that we can share with other people. But it only came from actually engaging in the process. Right. And so we're going to give you some like ideas to think about as you start to think about how you want to engage in your own anti-racist journey and your own anti-racist work, right? Because it is always going to be unique to you. And maybe one day you'll be giving a speech and creating a video yourself on how you've navigated these systems and your best practices, because that's what it comes from, is practice. Cool. So firstly, these are two kind of like, this is a really important framework that we like to share. Oftentimes, when we think about anti-racist work, or when we think about justice work or equity work or social justice, these are all different names and terms we've utilized in the past and in the present around like this work. When we think about it, oftentimes people are actually thinking about it in the way that it's window work, right? So they're looking out of a window and saying like, oh, this is all the things that I'm seeing that are going on in the world. I see that certain people don't get access to like these resources, or certain people make more money than others. Certain people with certain skin colors have like harder times in certain environments. I see that, right? And that is very much an important part of the work, right? Looking out of the window and seeing how the world is, right? But what is also really, really important, and sometimes things that people miss, is that there needs to be this mirror work, right? You need to be able to also not just look out the window and see what's going on in the world. You also need to look into a mirror and see how are you reflecting some of those systems, right? When you see a system where certain people make more money than others, how are you thinking about how that pertains to your own experience as someone who might have a certain kind of financial standing or not? You know, when you think about certain people having like access to like affirmations or like, you know, supportive adults in their life based on their skin color, right? Or because of the place that they were born in, how does that reflected in your own experience? And how does that color the way that you see the world, right? Because if you do the mirror work, when you look out the window, I promise you things are going to look a little different. Even if you feel very confident that you understand what is going on, you know, and what we need to actually disrupt, the mirror work always illuminates things that we don't know, right? I am a Black queer person, but I absolutely have to do mirror work every day on my identity, on the fact that like I right now, you know, am not a working class person. And some folks in my community, the folks that I care a lot about, are working class, and I have to think about class. Or some folks in my community are, you know, transgender, and I am, although I might be non-binary, I am not transgender. So my experience is different, right? And so if I look in the mirror and realize that I still have some kind of like thoughts around gender and like gender identity that's colored based on my experience, it's easier for me to actually kind of like do the work when I look out the window again. So, right. And so I just wanted to like give that general kind of like example. And of course, you might have your own examples, but thinking about that, like, you know, in what ways are we going to be looking out the window as we continue to sharpen our understanding of what's going on? And in what ways and like moments are we going to be looking in the mirror to see what we're reflecting back? Something that is really beautiful from a book around like how to be an anti-racist is this quote: "The heartbeat of racism is denial, while the heartbeat of anti-racism is self-reflection, recognition, admission, and fundamentally self-critique." Like I just gave you an example, like some of that mirror work is some radical reflection or self-critique where you're like, wow, actually, I never really thought about this because I am cisgender, or that means that I am a male and I feel like I align with the male identity, or I was born woman and I feel like I align with the, you know, a woman gender identity, right? It's easy for us to not think about that if we're not doing that reflection. And so a big part of this anti-racist work is self-reflection, which is why this session is really built in this way. Cool. And then I also want to name, right, that something that I also learned actually by working in Seattle Public Schools is the idea of a growth mindset. Right. And so sometimes when we engage in this work, it's very easy for us to actually have a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And so with a fixed mindset, you might have these self-deprecating or these like negative thoughts in your head around your own ability to engage in this journey. You might think, you know, I don't know where to start or what to say. Right. But having a growth mindset, the flip of that is that I will educate myself and I build my confidence to speak against injustice. Like I might not always know what to say, but if I educate myself, if I work on it, if I build my confidence, I will eventually, right? Or you might say like, I don't like how I'm feeling, right? Like it's awkward, right? Like I just had to realize that like, oh yeah, I thought I was a great person, but there's also ways that I haven't even thought about the reality of somebody who was different from me. And I haven't made space for other people in ways that also people haven't made space for me, right? I'm like continuing this harmful cycle, right? And I don't like how that feels. But a growth mindset in that might be, I am uncomfortable. I must be learning a lot, right? And so I want to like pause here and just like let you all read over some of these things and think, you know, like what are some of these negative thoughts that you might be telling yourself that might stop you from actually engaging fully in this learning? Because that's what the most important part is that you are willing to engage in the learning, engage in the self-reflection, the self-critique to start to be on your journey, right? And so like just look over some of these things and think about, you know, like what might be a negative thought that I have for myself, and like how do I flip that? How do I have a growth mindset, an idea that I can possibly be learning and expanding from this experience? Cool. So next up, we're gonna have a little bit of a pause, right? So I've been talking, and already, right, there might be things to start to like chew on and think about. So we're gonna give you a moment of reflection. There are gonna be several of these throughout the session, but this particular question is really to get you grounded, which is the idea of like you starting to think about like, how do I connect to this content, right? A lot's going on in the world, and your mind might be like, I'm listening to you talk. I like your voice. It sounds great. And I also had a rough week, right? And so this is an opportunity for you to like make that conscious shift from like thinking about kind of like all the things that you're going through or going on in your life to really focusing on this content so that you can get the most out of the learning. So the first grounding question, what inspired you to become a volunteer with youth? What might you be nervous about as you work towards developing healthy relationships with youth? So I'm gonna model what it looks like to answer all these questions for you all. So you also can get to know a little bit about me and my experiences. So how I would answer, right, is what inspired me to become a volunteer. So I actually, I started my journey in education or working with youth as a volunteer in a middle school in Los Angeles, in East Los Angeles, right? And what inspired me was that I was an outcast, right? Like as a kid, I felt that I didn't belong. I felt like I shouldn't talk and that I was different and weird. And like, you know, there was no connection between me and other youth, and especially no connection between me and a lot of adults, right? And so when I became a volunteer, it was really important for me to make space for the complexity of the youth I got to work with, like just their identities. Like, you know, like a lot of the youth I ended up working with were considered to be emo or, you know, punk. And we would listen to like punk rock and play cards and talk about school and like write poems, you know, in between those things. But I really tried to make space for them to be who they were and to not have them like have to, you know, do something else or be someone else to seem like, you know, I would approve of that or affirm them. Right. So it was really important for me to make space for someone to be, you know, different. Because I felt different. And I really did that when I started off as a volunteer. So that was a big reason why I decided to start. And lastly, like, I was really nervous to start to develop relationships with youth because I was young myself. When I became a volunteer, I was around 20, 21, you know, like I still had a lot of learning and developing to do myself around who I was. And so I was like, you know, will I be the right adult for the youth? Will I be a good role model? Will I even navigate this right? And I also like, you know, didn't always have the best relationship with school. I didn't really feel like, you know, super excited to go when I was a young person. And so I was kind of nervous even as an adult to be in school so much because I didn't really enjoy it as much as a kid. So I was like, you know, how am I going to experience this? And will I make school exciting for someone else when I didn't always feel it was exciting? So those were some of the things that I was thinking about. So now it's time for you to start in your first reflection question. So again, I want you all to pause this video for at least 5 minutes to reflect on this question, write it out, right? And because at the end of this session, you'll hopefully have the opportunity to talk to other volunteers or even a volunteer manager or coordinator around some of your answers. So definitely take some good notes. I'll see you back here in 5 minutes. Awesome. Thank you for engaging in that reflection. Yeah, and let's keep on going. So now let's get to the good stuff. What exactly is anti-racist work? Right? Like even for me, right, as a consultant, one thing that was really exciting and fun for me is creating sessions like this because it allows me to go deeper in my understanding. Like I said, like this, I will say that this work is never ending, right? So there's never going to be a time where you're like, I know the perfect definition for everything. I know exactly what everything means. I've applied it to the way that I show up and, you know, I've completed that destiny. I'm done, right? Like it is going to be this perpetual work. You're going to constantly go deeper. It's going to become more complex, more nuanced. So every time I get to do a session and create a session like this, I actually get to have the opportunity to reassess what I know about what anti-racist work is, but also like start to make it simple, right? Like I'm a Black person. I come from a Black community, and I want to create sessions and spaces where people, no matter where you're at in your journey, no matter what, you say in terms of education background or anything where you're at, that you can access this, because I believe that all of us could be healing and should be healing and transforming through this work. So I really want it to be accessible. So while I know it on a deep level and I have these really complex words, and I might even have said something that you're like, wow, that was a lot, right? I also want to make it simple. So let's try to make it simple. What is anti-racist work? So firstly, I want to name, right? Like we talked about in the outcomes, like language sometimes is the barrier to people engaging in this, because they're like, I don't know how to say it. Or, right, like we are a multi-generational community. You might have come from a community where this work was called something totally different. Like it wasn't anti-racist work back then. Back when you started, it might have been equality or it might have been social justice. I want to name that all of this language is valid and important, right? So even if we're not using words that you've heard before, know that there is a connection between these words, but also know that there is an evolution of language. The reason why we're changing is because, like I said, like as you explore these terms and you start to understand things, it becomes more complex, more nuanced, and you realize that some words actually get in the way of what you're trying to get done, right? So I'm going to give you all some of the newer language that we're using, but I want to acknowledge, right, that social justice was one of the, and is still some like a term that people like to use when they're thinking about this work, right? And equality, right? And we're moving into like different terms, right? But like those terms that we're moving into really just built off of those older ideas, right? They're in a continuation and evolution. They're not an either or black or white or this or that. So let's talk a little bit about the language of justice, right? Like what is justice? So the definition, justice addresses and removes systemic barriers in a way that leads to long-term, sustainable, equitable access and opportunities for generations to come, right? And so justice, again, systemic barriers are like not just like physical, not just financial barriers. They're also like mental and emotional. They're like actually like barriers that have been built into the way that we operate, right? And that's the one thing that's really important to note, is that this work is really complex and nuanced because it has been going on for a very long time. This oppression, the idea that some people are better than other people is an idea that has been ingrained in American culture for a very, very, very long time, right? And so when we think about the work that we're needing to do, we have to realize that now there are like barriers to us actually achieving justice because of how intentional the barriers are and how deeply embedded they are in everything that we do. And even for me, again, as a Black queer person, as someone who is doubly marginalized, I still can perpetuate some of those barriers, right? So justice, it addresses and removes those barriers, right? In a way that leads to long-term, sustainable, equitable access to opportunities. Ultimately, what we want to see is everyone have access to the opportunities that resonate with their hearts, right? That youth get to grow up in a community where it's like, I want it to be these things, and there are actual ways to get to those things. There are pathways that lead to the places that I want to be for generations. Like that is what justice is, simply, right? It's everyone deserves to get what they want, in the world, get what their heart desires, get the things that make them feel excited and full and affirmed and supported and loved. Everyone deserves that. Right. And so that is justice. And the work of justice, right, is that oppressive systems are always at play, like I say, but justice redesigns oppressive systems in ways that accounts for all of the history and needs of individuals and groups to allow true harmonious living, right? So it accounts for those barriers, so the pathways are illuminated. So to give you an example of justice, right? When I was growing up, I actually experienced justice in the school system because I actually went to schools that were full of Black and brown educators. Like all of my teachers were Black, right? And so even when I was going for advanced placement, my teacher had us read only African-American literature, right? And so I got to see that academia and high academic achievement and also exploring my culture went hand in hand, right? Like that is justice in a system where oftentimes a lot of Black and brown folks are not shown that their culture or their way of life or their stories or their narratives are valued enough, and that those things actually come into educational spaces. right? And so just the idea that like we can put those two things together is justice, right? And it starts to lead to long-term sustainable kind of like change, right? Because like now I'm in front of you all talking about justice, because when I was in high school, I had a teacher who stood in front of me to talk about justice, right? Like that is real work. And it leads to us in engaging in harmonious living. And so when we talk about justice, that's what we're talking about. Anti-racism. So again, one of the more recent updates in our evolution of language is the idea of anti-racism that is starting to kind of like become socialized into schools and terms of communities and like the public institutions you go to, in terms of your hospitals, everything, like in so many different ways of life. People are starting to say like, what does it mean to be anti-racist in our approach to what we're doing? It shifts everything. So the definition: anti-racism is the active process of identifying and eliminating racism by changing systems, organizational structures, policies, and practices and attitudes so that power is redistributed and shared equitably. So again, it's the process of identifying and eliminating racism, right? Racism is insidious. It is actually very hard to identify, right? So when we're trying to achieve justice, if we don't actually think about like how the role race plays in that as a barrier, we won't actually get to it, right? And so anti-racist is like being really paying particular mind to the idea that racism impacts everything, right? And starting to think about like how we can eliminate the idea of racism in the way that we change the way that we show up in systems, structures, and policies. And overall, if you don't hear anything else, the goal of all of this work is to redistribute power, which means to shift and share power in ways that it hasn't been before, right? So again, you might think about that as like Black folks haven't had a lot of power to like say what they think education should be or to experience education in the way that they'd want to, right? And so we're shifting that power and giving it back to Black folks. So queer folks haven't had opportunities or spaces to actually like express themselves or to even learn about their own identities in formative environments or in schools or in their relationships with adults. So we're shifting that power, we're sharing it, we're giving them the power to do that thing again. That's justice and that's anti-racist work, right? And so I just wanted to give these examples as we start to get more understanding of what oppression is and the actual barriers that exist. Our next thing, and what we're going to talk about at the end of this session, is how do we shift and share power then? Once we realize where power is actually showing up, who has power and why they have power, what are we going to do about that? Right. And the beautiful part about you and the work that you get to do with youth and your volunteer role is that every day you show up, you have the opportunity to shift and share power in big and little ways, right? You have that power no matter what your role is, whether you are creating your own sessions with youth, whether you're just going for walks, whether you are like checking in on them, once every other week. You have the opportunity to share power and shift power and start to actually eliminate barriers to the pathways that lead to where they want to be, right, in your relationship. And we're going to talk about how to do that in this session. So the work of anti-racism, it really moves us from talking about racial justice into engaging in action, right? So we can talk about justice all the time. Like I can talk to you all till your ears fall off around what systemic barriers are and like how they're showing up, right? But if we're not actually starting to think about like how we want to like eliminate that, how we want to shift and share power once we realize what the problem is, then we're not moving. So anti-racist work is actually very much like a verb. It's what you do. It's something that you have to actively do every day, every moment that you are with youth. Every time you think about engaging, you have to be intentional in that way to actually engage in anti-racist work, where justice is the actual realization that there are barriers and that you need to start to create equitable access to opportunities, right? And so they do different work, but they do sit side by side. And these two things together, that's really our hope. That's our goal and the work that we want to do when we are working with youth is to start to like create more opportunities for justice and to be anti-racist in our approach in the ways that we show up for relationships. Cool. So that was a whole bunch, huh? So now what we're going to do is actually give you again another time to pause and reflect. Because again, a big part of this work is for you to start to realize, okay, something's came up for me in that last little section and I want to sit with it. So here is the question. What part of what Aaron named when defining justice and anti-racism resonated with you for your reasons for wanting to become a volunteer? What parts of justice and anti-racist work might you want to continue reflecting on or learning about, right? And so I can give an example. One thing that's really important for me, like when I think about this work, is actually the idea of like shifting and sharing power. As someone who grew up feeling like I didn't have a lot of power, as an adult or even in any leadership position, right? I also worked as a director for a nonprofit. And I always thought, like as a manager, as someone's boss, and I'm putting quotation marks in the air, y'all can't see me, but as someone's boss, I thought a lot about like, hey, like actually what are the power dynamics of me being someone's boss? Like what are the ways that I take power away from them, and how do I shift and share that power? And even with other Black folks, like I am Black, but I was in a position of power. How did I like, what power did I have over other Black people? How am I giving power back to Black people? How do I still account for race? Even if I share the same racial identity as that person, there still is a need for me to account for that, right? And so that's what really resonates with me from the idea of justice and anti-racism, is that we always have to be accounting for power, right? And today we're going to talk about that. So don't worry if you're like, what is power, right? But like we have to be accounting for it. And that's what I resonate with. 2, what parts of justice and anti-racist work might you want to continue to reflect on or learn about? I think, yeah, like I said, like you oftentimes are, aware or conscious of the ways that justice needs to come for you and your identities or the people that you are closest to, right? So one thing that I always think about is like, in my community, what are some of the identities of the folks around me? Are they all the same as mine? Are they different from mine? And if they're different from mine, have I actually made space to understand what their barriers are, what opportunities they want to see and how they want to get there? Right. And so that's the work that I still want to continue to do, is like to one, expand my community to the point where I'm in community with people who are not just like me, so that I can also learn more about their experiences and their realities and the barriers to them feeling like they're getting what they want out of life, so that I can help them there. And that's where I'm really thinking about. And even when I think about my work with youth, like I'm still like, what are some communities of youth that I haven't worked with? What does it mean to work with those communities? And how do I like work on that as an adult who wants to become anti-racist and to strive towards justice? So that's my modeling of that question. And again, I'm gonna give you all 5 minutes to reflect, jot down some thoughts. And again, you'll have the opportunity after this session, hopefully, to talk to someone about kind of what are your thoughts. So reflect, and I will see you soon. Awesome. Thank you again for engaging in that reflection. Let us now talk about what oppression is, right? And so we got to talk a little bit about kind of like how we should think about this work, remembering, right, that it is both looking out the mirror and seeing what's going on in reality, but also looking out the window and seeing what's going on, but also looking in the mirror and thinking about how we're reflecting this. So as you learn more about oppression, I want you to really think about yourself, like think about like how this definition might apply to your current life, like things that you're witnessing or seeing in yourself and in the people around you. Cool. So oppression. We like to use this metaphor when we're talking about oppression. It's actually very helpful. So 2 young fish are swimming, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way. The older fish greets them and says, "Morning, how's the water?" And those fish say, "What the heck is water?" Right? Like, because when you are existing in a system, right? Like if you grew up in the water, right? You've never seen anything else besides and beyond the water. You might not even call it water, because it's the environment you grew up in that you've learned, right? And that is exactly how oppression works, right? Oftentimes we don't even experience it or feel it because we grew up, we literally were born into it and we exist in it every day. So we actually drink that water, we digest it, and we don't always see it consciously that it is water. Right. And so that's kind of something to think about. So if you're like, I've never really noticed depression, like we say, y'all are talking about oppression a lot in this session, and I've never heard of it, or I haven't seen anyone actively around me ever experience oppression, know that we probably all have experienced it. We just didn't necessarily feel it or see it because of how we've been conditioned. And that is kind of really important for us to think about as we start to like get deeper in our understanding of what this is like, oh yeah, I'm going to eventually start to see it more. I'm going to start to see it show up in these relationships. I'm going to start to see it show up in these systems. When I watch TV, I'll start to see it. When I'm on the phone, when I'm on Facebook, Instagram, I see it, right? Like oppression is insidious until it's not. And the hope of this work is for us to like get deep enough in our understanding that it becomes like easily seen, right? So that we can actually disrupt it and so that we can show up as anti-racist and start to strive towards justice. So what is oppression? So here's a definition. Oppression is when a person or group of people who have power use it in a way that is not fair, unjust, or cruel. Oppression is historical. Our country was founded on oppressive beliefs, and these ideas are built into our cultural norms, laws, institutions, and systems. This is the reality we were born into and learn as young people. So again, I highlighted power, right? We talked about that when we were talking about the definition of anti-racist work. The definition, the understanding of anti-racist work, right, is to realize that we have to be shifting and sharing power, right? And why? Because oppression literally takes the power away from certain people. Like, again, if you're a visual person like me, like I like a lot of video games. I see it as, the way that I see oppression is like, literally like there's this life force being drained from a certain person because they hold identities like being, like we talked about in our first reflection sheet, like they may be Black. They may not have been, born in America, or their parents might not have spoken English as a first language. They might not be cisgender. They might be queer. They might, like the same gender, or might not like people at all when they think about gender, right? Like there's so many different identities, but those identities are oftentimes like taken away from like power, the light or power, and that their power actually is being sucked away from them and given to someone else unjustly, not fair, and in a way that is oftentimes really cruel, right? That is oppression. And whether you see that explicitly in the violence, right, that we're seeing in our country, or whether you see it like more subtly when you think about the way that we talk to each other, the way that some people have to experience like going shopping and feeling like policed, or the way that people are just mean to certain people based on identity, even if it's like being conventionally attractive, right? There's so many ways that people are oppressed for parts of their identities that we don't really talk about, right? And so think about it on this like big scale. Of course, we've seen it in our society, especially in the last year, a lot of violence that is absolutely oppression, but it is also this subtle thing that we don't always see. Oppression is historical. So our country was founded on oppressive beliefs. So again, like one thing that's really important is like, it's not simple, right? Like, and the reason why we say that, you have to keep going into this content and like, reflecting on it and going deeper and unpacking it a little by little is because, like it said, our country was built on this. It was founded on oppressive beliefs that like certain people were better than other people. And now they're built into all of our norms, the ways that we exist, our institutions, and the way that we treat each other, especially in the way that we as adults see youth. Right? There's absolutely a power dynamic between adults and youth that we need to be aware of. And that power dynamic is oppression if we are not actively trying to like undo it, right? Even if we don't consider ourselves as an oppressive person, even if you're like, again, I am Black, I am brown, or I have these marginalized identities, I am a woman, in a patriarchal or in a male dominated society, any of us can still be perpetuating oppression with each other, right? And so I'm gonna show you all a little bit of a video to give you more context around how oppression manifests.
Those emotions, they were put on hold by time, but at Claire's bridal weekend at a Verbo beach house, those emotions also made the trip.
Oppression. It's a word that's often used as a blanket term, but there's actually a whole lot more to it. There are 4 interlocking aspects of oppression: ideological, institutional, interpersonal, and internalized. And it might seem like a small difference, but it's very important to be able to distinguish between each kind, because understanding oppression is the first step to fighting it. Let's start with the core at the heart of every form of oppression: ideology. Every system of oppression comes from the idea that one group is somehow better than another. Ideological oppression starts when the dominant group associates positive qualities with itself and negative qualities with the marginalized or othered group. Ideological oppression describes the deeply ingrained social root of inequality. It's the larger overarching idea that leads to the isms. For example, the idea that Black people are dangerous is ideological racism. The idea that poor people are lazy is ideological classism. Ideological oppression leads to institutional oppression. Institutional oppression is the way that systems and institutions manifest the dominant ideology. Institutions control access. Who is able to get to what and how? This includes legal rights, police practice, access to medical care and education, public policy, political power, and media representation. For example, when women make 2/3 of what men make, that's institutional sexism. When a building is constructed without wheelchair ramps, that's institutional ableism. All of this leads to interpersonal oppression. Interpersonal oppression is probably the easiest to recognize because it happens all around us. Interpersonal oppression is the way that people play out discrimination and violence on each other. It can take the form of microaggressions, jokes, stereotypes, and harassment. For example, when a student is bullied for being gay, it's interpersonal homophobia. When a Muslim person is told that they're a terrorist, it's interpersonal Islamophobia. And all those forces, ideological, institutional, and interpersonal, lead to internalized oppression. Internalized oppression is the way that people with marginalized identities internalize narratives of their own inferiority. It's what leads people to feel less than. This is the end goal of oppression. The oppressive party doesn't need to exert force any longer because the marginalized group is enacting oppression on itself to maintain the status quo. It's important to remember that it's never a marginalized person's fault that they feel internalized oppression. It's simply what happens when someone faces negative stereotypes, low expectations, and ongoing discrimination. So, for example, an immigrant feeling embarrassed about having an accent is internalized xenophobia. When a trans woman feels that they can never be a real woman, that's internalized transphobia. So, to review, the 4 I's of oppression are ideological, institutional, interpersonal, and internalized. Each of these types are interconnected and completely supported by the others. They can never exist on their own and can even be seen as a cycle. Now that you understand the different kinds of oppression, you're even more equipped to fight it. Don't forget that any effort to dismantle oppression should aim to address it at all 4 of these levels. Thanks for watching.
Awesome. So again, we just got the opportunity to kind of like learn a little bit more about like what oppression is and how it manifests. One thing, right, that I wanted to just call your attention to from looking at the video, something that resonated with me, right? And again, what comes up for you, what is resonating with you, the thing that you are like, oh, focusing on is oftentimes just what you need to be focusing on for your journey. So if you're like, oh, I got this one thing out of that, out of all the things they said, this one thing really resonated or like stuck out to me, that's something that you should really follow. One thing that really stuck out to me is this idea of internalized oppression, right? Where like, because of these conditions of growing up in the system where, you know, like there's ideas that I am less worthy or ideas that certain people are less worthy. And then like, because that exists in our systems, right, institutionally, and because that starts to show up in the way that people treat me, right? Like in the way that even people that love me, my friends, my family, my parents treat me, I start to internalize that, right? And so why it's so important for us to, as adults who are working with youth, like start to engage in this justice and anti-racist work is that every time we show up and we make space for them to be who they are, and every time we disrupt an idea that might have been kind of like prevalent in the way that they've experienced the world so far, we are disrupting this internalized oppression that they're starting to develop, right? We're combating that and showing them that they don't need to experience that those ideas actually are not true. Right? A lot of my life as an adult has been me trying to like unpack these ideas that are not true about me because of the ways that I was like experiencing the world, right? And even you, right? When you engage in reflection sheet number 1, you might have noticed that there are some ways that you've started to internalize things about yourself that you don't think are true. And like as an adult, you might have gone to therapy, and I hope we all have, right? Like it's nothing wrong with it, but having to go to therapy oftentimes when you're an adult because there's so many ideas that you develop from growing up in an oppressive world in reality that you have to let go of at some point, right? And in our relationships with youth, every day we have the opportunity to help them do that work before they get to the point where they're adults and is heavily weighing on who they are. So just one thing I wanted to name when I thought about and looked at that video. So how oppression shows up in our relationship with youth, right? So again, we talked about oppression, and you might start to make connections and like, oh, wow, this might be oppression, or I've experienced oppression in these places and never really thought about it. But now we're really wanting to focus on like how oppression could show up in relationships, right, with youth as an adult, especially if you're like, I'm a great person. When I was working with youth, I'm like, I'm super funny. I'm really great. I'm like, I have style. Like kids are going to love me. Right. And there are still ways that I showed up as oppressive where kids were like, we're youth. We're like, hey, like you actually aren't cool with that, or that doesn't feel cool, or you didn't listen to me, or like you did this thing. Right. It's so easy for it to show up in our relationships, even if we're unaware of it. So we want to talk a little bit about that. So the way that oppression really shows up in our relationships with youth is the power over. Right. So we have this as adults because of like, again, how oppressive worlds and realities kind of like build one group of people up and knock another group down. That actually happens between adults and young people in our community all the time, right? Where adults are built up and seen to have had this life experience, to have all of this wisdom and this knowledge, and have, again, like they make the best decisions because they're smarter, right? Where like youth are like still developing and they don't know themselves and they make mistakes and they're a little bit wild and they talk a lot and they're really goofy when they need to be serious, right? But like us engaging in this and like living into that dynamic and that way of like saying like these relationships should go is actually living into a power we have over youth, right? And so power over is really how power is most commonly understood, right? This type of power is built on force, coercion, domination, and control, and motivates largely through fear. The power one person or group of people can wield over another person or group is dependent on a myriad or a lot of external factors and subtle agreements. Right. And so I, especially, working in schools, that's one thing I noticed a lot is like a lot of adults, they really lived into this power they had over youth. And honestly, they used a lot of force and coercion or domination to get students to do what they wanted or youth to do what they wanted. So there's like, hey, like if you don't do this, I'm going to write you up. If you don't do this, you're going to go to timeout. If you don't do this, you're going to have to talk to another adult who is a figurehead in community, and they're going to reprimand or they're going to like punish you, right? If you don't do this, something bad will happen. If you don't do this, you're going to like feel bad. You're going to like experience things that are not positive, right? And that is absolutely us like living into this power we have over youth. And it might seem like we're doing something to kind of like build, healthy boundaries. Sometimes people are like, youth, or they need that like strong discipline, right? They don't need discipline in that way. They need us as adults to help them create boundaries or like how they want to show up in an environment, and then in a way that is safe and, inviting and welcoming. They don't need us to like tell them where to go and like push them and guide them in the direction we want them to go. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but that absolutely is a power over. And so we have this ability as adults, even if we don't know it, even if we don't believe in it, we have a power that we can wield over youth if we're not intentional about it. Right. And so it's important for us to know that every time we engage in a relationship, in a conversation, because youth are so used to it. Right. If you show it up in that way, so most times youth aren't going to say like, hey, you're using your power over me. They're just going to say like, that's what adults do. I'm a kid. Right. Kids have to be in this lane because they're already internalizing the idea that youth is less powerful, less important than adults. And so we need to always be actively disrupting that. And that's one thing I practice a lot. As an adult, when I'm working with youth, is like, hey, like you have complete agency and control over your own learning. You are super intelligent. You know what to do, right? Your intuition, like I told you in the session, your intuition will tell you what you need to be learning and working on. I'm just here to help you clear paths. And we're going to talk about what that means. But before we do that, that was a lot of information. And we're going to get another pause reflection moment. I know you're like, geesh, that was a lot of words and I really need to sit with it. Yeah, that was a jam-packed session. Part of the section. So this is your next reflection prompts. In what ways might you have witnessed or experienced a power over and we also call this adultism, right? Like the idea that adults are more important than youth is an actual form of oppression, right? So in what ways have you experienced or witnessed power over and or adultism show up within your own experiences with adults when you were younger? What are some aha moments that might be important to keep in mind as you develop relationships with youth? So for me, I have an example. I had a math teacher when I was in elementary. I won't say her name. I think I remember it, but like ultimately she was the type of adult who was always kind of like, you all get in line. This is what I said to do. So that's it. And she would literally make fun of kids who didn't do what she asked them to do. Right. And so you literally wanted to do what she asked you to do, because if you didn't, she was going to like embarrass you in front of everyone. And like the whole class would laugh at you. Like that happens a lot. She did that at least a few times a day. Right. And so when I think about like this power over, right, even if I didn't think about it, in the rest of my education or even in my young adulthood, I never really thought about that teacher as having a power over me or using it in that way. But now that I've done this type of reflection, I'm like, wow, that teacher was actually using some kind of force to make us do what she wanted. She didn't make me feel like I was a partner in that work with her. And that was really tough. And what are some aha moments that might be important to keep in mind? One aha moment that is important for me when I was talking about kind of this power over that I like to keep in mind is that oftentimes, like adults, like we know the truth is that we don't actually have a power over youth. And sometimes youth are like uncontrollable, right? And so it's really easy for you to like engage in this power struggle with youth and say like, hey, I need you to do this or else, and start to wag your finger and tell them what is right and what is wrong, because that is the only way it feels like you can actually like use your power to get them to go in the direction you want. And the aha moment for me is that they don't always want to go in the direction you want because they shouldn't, right? This is their learning journey. You are acting as a support, as a partner in that learning journey. And it is on you to figure out how to be the best partner for that youth, and how to be the best support for that youth. It is not on them to go in the direction that you want them to go in. So even though it feels easier to start to use force in this relationship, like it's always important for me to remember that like I have to actually rethink what my whole purpose is when I'm even engaging in conversation with youth, right? I'm trying to disrupt I'm trying to like strive towards justice. I'm trying to be more like to engage in anti-racist. I'm trying to disrupt oppression and especially like not contribute to and maybe even unpack what it means to have some of the internalized oppression already about their own identities, right? And so I need to keep that in mind even when it gets hard, right? And that's the things like even when this gets hard, know that there is a way to actually work with youth that doesn't require you to use force, doesn't require you to use the power over them to make things happen. Even though it's really hard and it takes practice, I'm not gonna lie, it's not something that you're gonna get in the first run through. You're gonna have to keep on trying, but know that it is possible and that those healthy relationships are again, they're a reality that you can actually go towards. So I'm gonna give you all some time to reflect on these questions, and I'll see you on the flip side. Welcome back. Cool. I hope that again, like as you can see, like the session is getting deeper and deeper. So if you're like, wow, these questions are getting harder to answer, that is intentional. That's how I build it, right? Like again, I am an educator and I know that I believe in you all, right? I believe that you're gonna learn and get the things you need out of this session. So just continue to reflect. And like again, there is no reflection too big or too small. All of the reflection is a part of your journey. So just keep on going. Even if it's again a little bit difficult for you to keep up or to follow along, maybe you might want to pause for a day, you know, and say like, let me just sit with what I got so far and come back later. But definitely take it at your own pace. That's the beauty of this being pre-recorded. So let's talk about what it means to build culturally responsive relationships with youth, right? That's the whole purpose of this session, right? Like we don't want to do any harm. And a part of not doing harm is firstly, like we said in the beginning, understanding like what is our goal, right? We're aiming towards justice, anti-racist work, right? And then like, what are we actually fighting against? What is the root issue? And the root issue is oppression, right? That shows up in these both very evident and apparent ways, and also in these very quiet, silent, like subtle ways that we have to start to do reflection to unpack and be conscious of. Because once we're conscious, we can actually think about how power is manifesting, how oppression is manifesting in our relationships with youth, with anyone in the community, and how we can actually start to shift that power. And again, the shifting of that power is the anti-racist part of it, right? And so now we're gonna talk a little bit about like, how do we shift that power? How do we build the types of relationships we wanna build? Like we've talked about other things we don't wanna see, are the things that could come up, but we haven't talked about what the good things are, right? And that's so important in this work too. So let's get into the good stuff. So what is our goal in building these culturally responsive relationships with youth? It is to co-create spaces that promote self-empowerment, self-determination, and self-liberation, right? And so like ultimately, like we want to be the adults who like, I don't know if you have any of these adults in your life, but I definitely do have adults where they showed me things about myself that I didn't believe in, right? Where they were like, Aaron, you're a compassionate person and you care about community. And I'm like, I don't like humans, right? I told you, right? I didn't feel like I grew up in a space where people like supported my identity. So I didn't want to talk. So I definitely didn't see myself as powerful. I saw myself as an isolated entity way away from other people, right? So for people to be like, you care about people and you like to show up for people really changed me. I remember that moment where I'm like, do I care about people? Do I want to show up? I guess I do. You know, like, so we're co-creating spaces, right? And co-creation is a big word. Like we're not just creating the space where it's like, feel empowered, have self-determination, have self-liberation. We're actually asking youth like, in subtle ways or even in explicit ways or like, intentional ways, like what does it mean to have a space where you feel excited and empowered, where you feel like you have self-determination or you can do anything you want to do, or in ways that you feel like you're free to like have agency over your own, development process. How do we co-create that? Like that is the culturally responsive relationship, is to realize that they have this culture, right, that we might not understand. Like going back to reflection sheet 1, you have these identities that you've grown into and grown up with that shape a narrative that you have about the world. But the students that you work with or the youth that you're going to be like volunteering to support might have a totally different culture. So you can't create a space that centers your culture, not understanding what their culture means and how it shapes what they think about when they think about empowerment or determination or liberation. We have to co-create that space. We have to be curious. We have to like really lean into that like challenge of figuring the student out and figuring out what they need. Because at the root of this work is the belief that students deserve and should be given more power and agency over their own learning environments. And again, I'll try to keep making these connections, right? When we talked about anti-racist work, it's about shifting and sharing power. When we talked about oppression, it was the idea that certain groups have more power and agency. So a culturally responsive relationship is understanding that the student should have as much power and agency as possible over their learning environments. But even if you're not even in classes, right, the youth should have as much power and agency over the type of relationship that y'all are developing as possible, how you spend your time as possible. And even if you don't get anything in this session, like that's my quick key that I use when I'm thinking about how I should show up, is like, in what ways am I actually giving people agency and control over their situation? And we're going to give you some examples soon. So if you're like, wow, that was cool, but I still don't fully understand it, we're getting there, right? So let me move on to the next slide. So we talked about power over, right? So what we really want to do, and this is something, again, to, write down, we want to share power with, right? So power with is a shared power that grows out of collaboration and relationships, right? Culturally responsive relationships. It is built on respect, mutual support, shared power, solidarity, influence, empowerment, and collaborative decision-making. Power with is linked to social power that influences the influence we wield among equals, right? And so firstly, I want to start with the end in this one, right? Do you see youth as your equal, right? Like, you're an adult and you're going into this situation where you have knowledge, you might have life experience, or you might be a subject matter expert in something. And do you see this youth that you're going to be volunteering to support as your equal, right? That's something for you to pause with and think about, because if you don't, there's going to be some reflection that you need to do. Like, do you think that they are just as capable of making decisions as you are, right? And even if you can make decisions quicker, or you know how to make certain decisions, what you're trying to do is create spaces for them to learn how to make decisions better, but they are capable, right? The word is capability, right? We might think about capacity. I mean, they might not have the capacity, but they always have the capability to, right? So they might not have the skills or the resources yet, but they have the potential, and we have to live into that potential when we think about what they're capable of and what we can do together. And again, it grows out of collaboration. Like, this work is all actually just about collaboration and communication. Like, people make it complex and they're like, hey, it's all of these technical terms. And again, we've given you terms and language that is really important. And eventually, when you really start to internalize it, it's just about communicating and about treating people with respect and, sharing power and, using your influence to do what's best for youth, even if it's not always what seems to be in your favor or makes life easier for you, because that's what we're volunteering to do, is to clear paths for other people to strive towards justice alongside them, not to strive towards our own justice, right? Like, that's not what we're doing in these relationships. So that is sharing power with youth. So the next thing, and again, this is just a really helpful framework. Again, like, these things that I've learned, they've come in hard ways, right? Like, they didn't always come from a quick little, like, oh, I could look at this YouTube video and now I kind of understand things. They came from trying and failing, from talking to people, from learning, from making mistakes, right? And so what I'm going to share with you all is absolutely like a accumulation, or like a product of all of the things that I didn't do right, all the things that I learned to do right, all the things that really worked, surprisingly, all the things that made my relationships with students exciting, right? Like, this is what this framework is. And you're going to also be able to see this in reflection sheet 2, where I will actually lay out explicit ways that you can actually show up as an advocate. But I'm going to explain to you a little bit what we're trying to do here. So we talked about the idea that we're sharing power with youth, right? And so what that really means is we're moving from an enforcer to an advocate. So an enforcer, right, is someone who ultimately censors adults, or like dominant culture, right? So like, you might not just be centering adultism or adults, you might also be centering race. You might be centering certain genders, certain like cultures, certain ethnicities, certain, economic classes might be centered in the way that you think about relationships. And if you center those dominant ideas, those dominant groups, naturally you're an enforcer. And I want to name that most times, if we're not consciously trying to disrupt it, we are going to be enforcers, right? It's kind of like one of those, escalators going up. If you're not actually like turning around and walking down the up escalator, you are just on the up escalator. You're just an enforcer if you're not intentionally going against the grain, right? So I want to name that if we aren't conscious, it is so easy for all of these things to happen, right? So if we're not conscious, we can talk about youth and the work from a deficit perspective, right? Like, as an example, I hear a lot of, adults talking about like, oh, this kid was really, a problem in class. They always talk, they disrespect people, they punch everyone around them, right? Like, they are just violent people, they're violent kids, and they need to figure out, we need to put them in a room or something so they can calm down or figure out a plan for addressing their violence, right? That's a like lens of an enforcer, right? Because an advocate, someone who like censors youth, was recognizing and communicating the strengths of the youth and the communities you work with, right? And so instead of like talking about them from this deficit perspective, you're realizing that, oh, actually, like, yeah, this youth might have had these situations happen at home. They might just not feel very good about the classroom structure. They might feel self-conscious about the way that they look or the way that they talk or the way that they're learning, and that might cause them to lash out. Right. And so I need to firstly see, like, who are they? Like, who are they? What are their strengths? What are the ways that, even if they're like, very like aggressive towards other youth, is what we might call it, they might actually be very social. They might actually love connecting with other people. And we can use that strength when we think about the plan we have for them. So we might be like, oh, actually, they just need to be in a group with people that they really like to hang out with, right? And if they did that, I noticed that they aren't as like violent. They don't start to lash out because they're enjoying their time. They're able to focus and use their strengths in a productive way versus like having to like figure out how to get their own needs met because the adults are centering themselves or enforcing oppressive ideas, right? If the adults are advocates and communicating those strengths, the youth can see a different pathway. And again, that's justice, right? Anything around clearing pathways is justice work. So enforcers might see yourself as someone who needs to fix youth or a marginalized community, which is so common. Again, like I said, like, do you see yourself as an equal? Right? Like oftentimes we don't, because when we're volunteering, we actually might have come in, your reason might have been like, I had a great life and I want to see other people have the same level of life as me, right? I need to fix their life. That is actually the viewpoint of an enforcer. An advocate builds positive relationships with youth to help them problem solve for themselves, right? And so like, I don't need to determine someone's reality or their story. I don't need to tell a youth that they're violent or tell them that they need to work on something or sit in a room. I need to build positive relationships and then start to get them to learn how to like realize what problems they're seeing coming up for themselves. Just like I told you in the session, like, what's coming up for you as a part of your journey. That's the same type of energy that you should bring to your relationship with youth. It's like, hey, like, what are some problems? What are some things that you're running into that's make it hard for you to exist in this space? Like maybe like we're asking you to sit down a lot, right? And it seems to be hard because you don't want to sit down. So let's problem solve. What could we do about that, right? Instead of being like, you don't like to sit down, the answer is staying still for 10 minutes if you don't do that, or else power over. We're shifting to a power with where we're like, actually, hey, you're equal, you can't sit, you don't feel comfortable sitting, you're a little bit antsy. Let's maybe get another tool. There's like a little bouncy ball over here, or maybe we can actually stand up at certain points in this relationship or go for a walk so that we can move more, because it seems like you need to get your body moving, right? Because I'm recognizing your strengths. So enforcers, right, guide youth towards focusing on goals created by adults, right? So it's so easy for us as adults to be like, again, this student is too active, too aggressive, too loud. The goals are like to get them to like learn how to be quiet, right? To like, and again, even in that, don't you hear how that's an enforcer? Like the goal is to get this student to not talk anymore and to just do work and then go home quietly. Like, is that like really engaging in someone and creating a space for them to be a whole person? I don't think so, right? We want to be advocates. So we want to bring youth into decision-making processes around the purpose of our time together, right? And so we might see like this student is very active, and maybe the youth, the problem they actually see isn't this, right? Like they're like, oh, actually, again, like I just need to make decisions around like how I want to like move my body, how I want to use my body while I'm learning, right? And instead of me guiding them towards figuring out how to sit still more, like what strategies we can get them to like, just listen to the teacher without talking, we need to actually engage them in the decision-making process. Like, what is the issue, right? What is the problem we want to solve? And then like, how do we want to solve that problem? And let's talk about it together, right? Let's make a decision together. And then I can support you through that in the future. Like you might want to stay accountable to that and it might be hard. So let's like goal set together. Let's do these things, right? And so that's kind of like how you move from enforcer to advocate when you think about goals, right? And it's, again, so easy, especially even if you are a volunteer who's been given explicit goals around what you need to see your youth like actually do in the classroom, or see like the types of things you all need to do in your relationship. Sometimes it feels hard or difficult to think, how do I make space for their decisions, right? But there are definitely ways. So reflection sheet 2 will help you with that. If you're like, this sounds cool, but what do you mean by that? I got some explicit examples for y'all. Lastly, enforcers have expectations and values in the space were created by adults with no input from youth. So when we think about what a space is, like I said, like you might be in a program where someone is like, this is what y'all are supposed to do together. These are the goals. These are the values. This is how we do it. And you haven't even met your youth yet. Like you don't even know what they want or what their hopes are, or what their dreams are. And in the program, no one asks you to do that, right? Like, and maybe they do, and hopefully they will, because again, because you all are working first, as a part of the Seattle Tutoring Coalition, I believe that all of the organizations within this this coalition, they really do value this. And so I know that this isn't going to be the case for y'all. And it is still so easy for us. I just want to name, so easy for us to name the values and expectations without talking to youth. So if ever you felt like that was already created and you didn't get the opportunity, being an advocate means pausing, right? And saying like, wait a minute, the expectations and values communicated should reflect those of the youth and the cultures and communities they come from. If the person that I'm working with is Muslim, right? Like, how are their cultural values and their cultural values and expectations kind of named in what I'm doing with them, right? And when I think about as an advocate, is like, how do I account for that? How do I make space for that? If my youth has told me, that they have certain economic hardships and barriers that they're experiencing in their family, or just like that their family has different ways of showing up than they show up, than they, are asking them to show up at school. How are they asking them to show up at home? Like, what are some things and rules that their mom has that they like or don't like, and like, how does that connect to what you're going to be doing with them, or rules that their parents, any of the folks in their life that they see as a figurehead or as a leader? What are those expectations? And can we kind of align those with the expectations and the culture that you're creating with when you work with them, right? And so these are the ways that we can share power. We can move from being enforcers of this oppressive system, being enforcers of these oppressive ideas, to being advocates, someone who walks alongside youth and says like, hey, like, actually you have complete power and agency to do this in the way that you want. And I'm going to be a help. I'm going to be someone who clears paths for you. I'm going to be someone who helps you navigate tough problems, but I'm not going to tell you what the problem is. And I'm not going to tell you how to solve it, no matter what age group you work with. Like, again, I've worked with like kindergartners, first graders, and you might be like, that is too young. Just tell them what to do. Like, no, at any age that you'll be working with youth, at least, they have the ability to actually make those decisions. You'll be very surprised. You're in a kindergarten class and you walk through a decision-making process. They're going to give you a decision. I saw a teacher once be like, I want to do this like 5-minute writing assignment. And the teacher, she's like, do you want to do that, class? And the class was like, no, we don't want to do this for these reasons. These are the reasons why, but maybe we could do it like this. Like, it is very surprising how willing they are to actually engage in that process with you if you create space for it. So that is the space that we're creating. So again, lots of content just there, right? We're going deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole. And so the question that I want you to think about now, what are some patterns you're seeing around the difference between enforcers and advocates? Is there an area you'd like to focus on most as you build new relationships with youth, right? And so something that I'm seeing when I think about enforcer versus advocate, again, is that enforcers oftentimes center their own perspective, their own narratives, while advocates center the perspectives and the narratives and the thoughts of the youth that they're working with, right? Which means that you have to get outside of your own head, right? Sometimes we get so caught up in what's happening and trying to figure out how to be right? How to like be the adult who knows the truth while the youth still is figuring it out, that we just like go with our own narratives. And it's like, this person, again, is overactive, they're loud, they're violent, versus this student just doesn't like to sit still. This student doesn't like sitting around certain students. This student doesn't like talking about certain things. This student doesn't like engaging in math in this way, or engaging in like any conversation in the way that I'm doing it right now, right? I have to not center my own narrative. I have to center the narrative of others. So that's the pattern that I see, right? And is there an area you'd like to focus on as I build new relationships with youth? Like, I think for me is really like the last piece, again, because I've been working with youth for a while. And honestly, all of those things that I showed you that I just talked about kind of build on each other, right? So I want to just go back to that and show you like you start off by like thinking about how you think about the youth, and then you go into actually thinking about how you talk to the youth about what is going on in their reality, what they want your support with, what they want the purpose of your relationship to be. And then you're able to start to like create goals alongside the youth and bring them into the process of figuring out how they want to go about those goals. But the last part, and the thing that is most hard, right? Like, so I wouldn't recommend starting here, is to think like, what are the expectations and the values of the space that I'm creating, right? Because you don't know that. You don't know even how to name that until you've done some of that other work, right? But for me, when I think about what is really important or resonating with me and what I want to work on right now, it's really like, how do I create spaces that like support and tend to the values that already exist in the communities that my students work with, right? So if they're, again, Muslim, do I know enough about, have I done my research? Do I know enough about that community and that culture to start to think about how these cultures connect between the space that I'm in with them and the space they're in with their family? And like, how does that shift my expectations of them, right? Like, how do I create a space that feels like home, that feels like family, that feels familiar or therapeutic, right? If I don't necessarily know enough about their culture, right? And so that's what I really want to focus on, is starting to, do my own self-work around like learning about other cultures and starting to think about like what the connections might be between expectations and values, right? So now I'm gonna give you some opportunities to reflect on that. So I am going to pause the video here and I will see you back shortly. Awesome. So again, thank you all so much for engaging in it. That was actually the final reflection question. So I know y'all are like, I don't know if I can go to another level, and you're going real deep here. Or you might have been like, that wasn't deep enough. And I actually want to go further in these ways, right? Like, again, you might have learned a lot about oppression already, or you might have been thinking about these things for a while. And this might have just reinforced what you already knew. And if it does, like, again, whatever came up for you, even if there's like, oh, I really like this one idea, even though I've been doing this for a long time, I really want to start to think about this thing, go deeper into that, explore it, Google it, find more videos, read books about it, right? Continue your own journey. And know, and again, if this is new to you, know that you can come back to this content and revisit it once you've had more experience with youth. And also that you can continue to grow and like deepen your understanding. Like, even if you felt like, oh, I only know this very basic thing that you just said, that's the only thing that really resonated with me right now in my journey, because I need to process that. That is totally okay, right? And know that you can continue to revisit this and go deeper and deeper. And that is the work of any anti-racist practitioner or any culturally responsive adult right now in community, is to constantly be like doing that mirror work, right? To ensure that we are actually striving towards justice, removing barriers, and that we are starting to actually like live into anti-racist practices where we're shifting and sharing the power that is inherently there, whether we want it or not. And with that, like, that is my closing. And again, I appreciate you all so much for just engaging in this. I know that it might have been like a world of information, and I again hope that it was given in a way that you all can start to make some sense of it and feel a little bit more empowered as you think about creating healthy relationships with the youth and not causing harm, right? Not perpetuating this power that is inherently there. Again, we also have the reflection sheet number 2. So if you're like, wow, that was a lot, but I still need a little bit more help, know that reflection sheet number 2 is going to give you even more explicit ways that you can show up as an advocate. And it is actually a framework and an assessment that you can use once a month to continue to build your practice. So you might see one thing on this reflection sheet and say, oh, I really want to focus on this part, you know, for the next month. And then in the following month, you can focus on something totally different in another category or the same category. So know that, again, like, this is your journey. I believe in you all. I'm so proud of you all for making the decision to be a volunteer and to work with youth and to be an advocate, right? You know, and to like continue this anti-racist work like every adult in the system has the potential and possibility and agency to do. I really applaud you all for like using your time and energy in this way, and know that I'm here as a resource for you. So feel free again to reach out if you have any questions, concerns to your volunteer coordinator or to the program that you're working with, and they can connect you to me if you also needed that. But no matter what, I hope that you all have an amazing year working with youth. It is such a rewarding process. It is a roller coaster ride if you've never done it before. And I'm just excited for you. Have a great day.